I arrived in Harlem, February 8th, 1938. The subway stopped at 135th Street and Lenox Avenue, and bracing February winds mingled with delicious bakery smells as I first laid eyes on Harlem. I saw wide, paper-littered streets, rows and rows of monotonous gray apartment buildings, and hundreds of Negroes filling the streets. Where was this leading me? Only one dim light glowed. God's will. I hoped I wasn't mistaken. Well, let me tell you, Harlem was a whirlwind. Within 1 week, Friendship House was open and growing. We had a hospitality center, study clubs, clothing rooms, youth clubs. I couldn't keep track of what was happening. Friendship and laughter transformed this corner of no man's land. Young and old, rich and poor, lay and clerics, and yes, blacks and whites poured through the doors of Friendship House and became friends. A house of friends. A house of love. I loved the Negro. I loved them with a passion that was immediate and total. I would have died for them. My soul was torn by the injustice I saw them victims to. So I covered the country, speaking out on interracial justice, especially to Catholics. I banged on the doors of Catholic schools, convents, seminaries, challenging their segregation rules with the gospel. And I was hated. I was afraid of a repeat of Toronto, so I kept Archbishop Spellman constantly informed. Your Grace, you don't see what I see every day. It is my anger towards the whites. That's what scares me. My soul howls at what I see white Catholics doing to the Negro. Last Monday, a Negro mother came to me in tears. On Sunday, during the sermon, she had heard that she commits a mortal sin, Your Grace, if she doesn't send her child to a Catholic school. So this little mother, the next morning, gets up, takes her little girl to the rectory to enroll her in the Catholic school. The door was slammed shut in her face by that very same priest. They are refused entrance to our churches, and all they want to do is pray. Young men and women, alive, vital, full of faith. I cannot get them into religious organizations, schools, seminaries, simply because they are black. Your Grace, they are denied communion in our churches. I cannot be silent, and I will not. I don't care what happens to me. I will not be silent. Not until white Catholics see that when they reject that little Negro girl, they are rejecting Christ. Edward J. Doherty was one of the highest paid newspaper reporters in the United States, and he waltzed into Friendship House one day like he owned the place. Oh, you're doing a story, are you? On Harlem. So you find Harlem wicked, do you? You want to know why Harlem is wicked? You go down in City Hall and you ask them why they turn up the heat and the electricity in January. Or better yet, why don't you go down to Manhattan to St. Patrick's Cathedral on a Sunday morning and you ask your respectable white Irish Catholics, why do they prefer to lay with Negro teenagers for 2 bits a turn? Go on, ask them, I dare you! Years later, Eddie said it was love at first fight. Oh, believe me, I certainly hadn't expected love. But there it was, all wrapped up in one guy, Eddie Doherty. Bishop Shield married Eddie and me. A private ceremony. June 25th, 1943. That was one of the most wonderful days of my life. Now, the trouble in Harlem started small, just like Toronto. The only difference this time was that it came from the inside. The staff began to question everything, especially me. You see, when you're young and idealistic, it's hard to understand the ways of God because He often uses the weakest and the most sinful to work out His plans. That was me. The staff began to question everything. I loved Harlem. I loved it. Its breakup shattered me. Through the pain, the words would come back to me. Remember, my child, you were born under the shadow of the cross.
She was very wounded. The bee was very wounded by the resistance and the rejection. She was discouraged and suffered a great deal. Not too many people, I think, know the depth of her suffering. I mean, she didn't want to be rejected. But being a person of deep spirituality, she knew that Jesus was rejected, that Jesus failed to convert the Jews, that Jesus was ultimately persecuted and crucified. So this is where her theology of the cross really deepens. And she brings to social action, so to speak, much more than just the cheerleader, do-gooder attitude. She's willing to die with Christ in the issue of racial harmony and justice.
When she would see things happening, when she would see pain, when she would see suffering, it would affect her on a personal level, not just because of her own altruism, but also because she knew that it was the pain of Christ. It was God was crying out for this situation to be resolved. I know that's a lot of what fueled her fight for racial justice in the United States. It was what fueled her desire to bring immigrants into Canadian society, to break down those barriers, the prejudices, the hatreds. All of that stuff was connected in some mystical way to the pain of Christ and the love that needs to go out and diffuse it.
The real problem for the modern world is alienation. How in God's name can we make people once again feel I am important, damn it. I've got something to do with my life. I can grow and become somebody. Right? And this is what our society just tells them, oh well, you are nobody, but you could look like somebody if you buy this product. And so you got a new religion. And what we have to say, we are nothing before God. But with God, we are everything. Right? This is why we have to find a whole new way. And this is why the bee, in some ways, didn't have all this kind of theological baggage. She didn't have all this kind of language. All she had this insight that if I can get people to love people and serve people, they will then become themselves. They will love themselves. They will, and it won't become egoism, because at that time, they're loving other people.
What happened, I guess, was that she showed me what being in love with God was like, and I mean that in a real sense. It was no longer up here. It just moved right down into here. That you didn't somehow need to be taught the techniques or the know-how. Just if you knew what was possible, then you had the grace within you to get there. And it was almost like there was no hill too high. I was just gonna get on a bulldozer. If there's a mountain, I was just gonna go right through the mountain. If there's a forest, I'd push all the trees out of the way. Just, this is what I've seen, what it can be like, and I want this. I want this with every fiber of my being. And it's the first time I'd ever heard that from anybody. It had to come from this lady stuck out in the middle of the bush.
The real legacy that she leaves behind is that sanctity and holiness and transformation and resurrection is available to every single human being. That was her spirituality. It's available. You don't have to be in a monastery. You don't have to be in Calcutta. You don't have to be in Regina serving the poor. You can be anywhere and find communion with God through this simple thing of doing everything you do with great love. And I think it's genius.